The house smelled faintly of garlic and roasted vegetables, a comforting aroma that usually spoke of warmth, care, and routine. But tonight, it felt oppressive, heavy, layered with the silent anxieties that had been accumulating over months. Sarah Mitchell moved around the kitchen with meticulous precision, chopping vegetables, setting the table, arranging silverware just so. Every movement was an effort to maintain normalcy, to mask the nagging suspicion growing in her chest. Daniel, her husband, sat in the living room, scrolling through his phone with a distracted air, the faintest crease forming between his brows. He seemed unusually tense, aware that the balance they had carefully maintained, the fragile rhythm of a family with 2 children, Ella and Max, was at risk of unraveling. Ella, the elder child, 13, leaned against the hallway wall, earbuds in, pretending not to notice the subtle shifts in her parents' demeanor. Max, 10, sat cross-legged on the living room floor, half attentive to a tablet game but acutely sensitive to the undercurrents of the home. Children, Sarah had learned, notice the smallest discrepancies, the way a parent's hand trembles when they answer a call, the faint sigh that escapes when no one is watching. "Dinner's almost ready," Sarah called, her voice calm but carrying a note of tension she could not entirely suppress. Daniel stood, stretching stiffly. "I'll help set the table," he offered, though his eyes betrayed an unreadable mix of guilt and anticipation. The truth had been gnawing at Sarah for weeks. Small clues, careless slips of information, had led her to a devastating realization. Daniel had a child with someone from his past, a person he had once loved, once promised he would never forget. And now, the child existed somewhere in their city, a reality he had kept hidden. Sarah tried to breathe normally, to anchor herself in the ordinary act of preparing a meal. Yet each movement felt deliberate, as if the walls themselves were waiting to witness the unspooling of secrets. "Mom, can we eat now?" Ella asked, lowering her earbuds and giving her mother a tentative look. Max followed suit, though his eyes darted between his parents, sensing the tension. Daniel glanced at Sarah, the unspoken conversation passing between them. They had danced around the truth for months, avoiding confrontation, hoping perhaps that the child would remain an abstraction. But the universe, as it often does in domestic dramas, had its own timing. They sat together at the dinner table, plates filled, cutlery aligned, yet the room felt like a stage for something inevitable. The children's chatter was punctuated by awkward pauses, the sound of silverware scraping against ceramic oddly loud. Sarah finally asked, her voice controlled, measured, "Daniel, is there something you haven't told me?" Daniel's hand paused midair, fork hovering. He looked at her, saw the steady determination in her eyes, and realized that the pretense could not hold any longer. "Yes," he admitted, voice low, almost brittle. "There's something you need to know. There's a child, a boy. His name is Liam." Sarah felt the table tilt beneath her, though the floor had not moved. The words were both a shock and a confirmation of every fear she had nurtured in quiet moments of doubt. Ella's mouth opened, a soundless gasp, while Max blinked rapidly, trying to process the notion that their father had a secret life, a secret family, a child who had existed parallel to theirs. "Liam. He knows about you, about me, about this family," Daniel continued, his voice trembling. "And I didn't know how to tell you." The revelation settled into the room like a dense fog. Sarah's mind raced, imagining the child, imagining the interactions, imagining the possible resentment or confusion that now hovered, tangible, between them. The children stared at their father, their own emotions a mix of betrayal, curiosity, and tentative fear. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside. I thought it would complicate everything," Daniel admitted. "I wanted to protect all of you, even if it meant hiding the truth." Ella stood abruptly, chair scraping back against the floor. "Protect us? By lying to us?" she demanded, her voice sharp, precise. "How is that protecting anyone?" Max, younger and quieter, spoke up. Will he come here? Will Liam be, like a brother or, what?" The questions hung in the air, unanswered but urgent. Sarah's mind flicked to the many possibilities. The tension, the emotional collision, the delicate balance between acceptance and resentment. Children, she knew, had a way of magnifying truth and misunderstanding simultaneously. The dinner ended in a fragile silence. Plates were cleared mechanically, and everyone retreated to different corners of the house, each consumed by their own thoughts. The evening air, heavy with unresolved questions, seemed to press in against the walls. Sarah found herself staring out the kitchen window, imagining the boy, Liam, standing somewhere, aware of the family he had not been born into, yet already entwined in its emotional threads. She wondered how this would reshape their lives, their identities, their notions of trust and love. Daniel sat down beside her, hesitant. "I don't know what to do next," he admitted, voice low, carrying both regret and hope. Sarah turned to him, the depth of her hurt softened by the complexity of circumstance. "We face it together," she said quietly, knowing that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test every fiber of their family bond. The night deepened, and the Mitchell house, though intact in structure, felt changed. Secrets had become reality, and the family, though shaken, was now staring directly into the consequences of hidden lives and intersecting pasts. The days following dinner were tense, filled with quiet observations and small, deliberate inquiries. Sarah moved through the house with a heightened awareness, each glance and gesture measured. The ordinary rhythms of family life, preparing breakfast, folding laundry, driving the children to school, had acquired a new weight, each action shadowed by the knowledge of Liam, the child she had never met, yet who now existed in every corner of their lives. Ella, naturally perceptive and fiercely inquisitive, began noticing oddities. A quick glance at her father's phone when he stepped out, fragments of conversations she hadn't meant to overhear, receipts tucked carelessly into drawers. Pieces of a puzzle she hadn't yet assembled. Max, younger and more sensitive to emotional currents, reacted differently. He didn't probe directly. Instead, he watched Daniel's expressions, the subtle tension in Laura's shoulders, the hurried tone in phone calls. Max felt the quiet, unsettling shifts in tone and body language, registering what his conscious mind couldn't yet name. One afternoon, Sarah found herself standing by the doorway of Daniel's study. The door was slightly ajar, and a stack of photographs caught her eye. She stepped closer, hesitating only briefly before glimpsing an image of a small boy with familiar eyes, Daniel's eyes, and a resemblance that was undeniable. Her heart raced. Liam existed, undeniably real, and he had a presence that had quietly intruded into their lives. "Ella, Max, come here," Sarah called, her voice unusually calm but firm. The children approached cautiously. "Look at this," she said, showing them the photograph. Ella's eyes widened. Is that him? That's Dad's child?" Daniel, entering the room at that moment, froze. His face reflected a mixture of guilt, anxiety, and resignation. "Yes," he admitted, voice low. "This is Liam. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how." The children absorbed the information differently. Ella's mind raced with questions, doubts, and fears of displacement. Max's gaze lingered on the boy's face in the photograph, emotions shifting between curiosity, unease, and subtle jealousy. Sarah, trying to maintain composure, felt a surge of protective instinct, not just for herself but for her children. She understood that this revelation would ripple through their lives, affecting routines, emotional bonds, and perceptions of family. "We need to understand this together," she said. "All of us." Over the following week, subtle encounters heightened their awareness of Liam's existence. Daniel received messages that he tried to hide, glimpses of an email from Liam's mother, and occasional references to the boy in phone conversations. Each interaction added layers to the children's understanding, deepening their internal conflict. Ella, frustrated by the lack of direct information, began asking pointed questions. "Why didn't you tell us sooner? How long has he been around? Does Mom know? Does he know about us?" Daniel struggled for answers, conscious of the delicate balance he was trying to maintain. Every answer he offered seemed inadequate, a fragile construction that threatened to crumble under scrutiny. Max, observing his sister's relentless curiosity, remained quieter, internalizing his own anxieties. He wondered how Liam perceived the world, how the boy felt knowing his father had another family. The questions weighed heavily on Max, stirring a complex mix of empathy and resentment. Sarah, navigating the mounting tension, realized that secrecy could no longer sustain them. The family was at a precipice. Acknowledgement was inevitable, confrontation unavoidable. That evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. The children exchanged cautious glances, aware that a critical juncture was approaching. Daniel and Sarah, sensing the inevitable, exchanged a long, silent look, the weight of truth pressing upon both of them. Ella broke the silence, voice firm. "We need to know everything. We need to understand who Liam is, and what this means for all of us." Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, you deserve that, and soon, we'll talk, all of us, honestly." The tension was palpable, a mix of dread and expectation. The family's ordinary routines, homework, dinner, television, were now infused with a sense of pending revelation. Liam's presence, though not physically in the home yet, had already reshaped their emotional landscape. As night fell, Sarah found herself staring out the window, imagining Liam in his own world, contemplating how he would react to the knowledge of a stepmother and two half-siblings. The children, too, lay awake in their rooms, processing the shifting contours of family life. Questions lingered, uncertainties multiplied, and the Mitchell household waited, suspended between the familiar and the unknown, poised for the confrontation that would inevitably follow. The Mitchell dining room had always been a place of ordinary warmth, the scent of roasted chicken or pasta filling the air, small talk punctuating the silence like a metronome. But tonight, the table seemed different. Plates gleamed under the overhead light, silverware aligned with obsessive precision, and yet the room hummed with an undercurrent of tension, unspoken, palpable, unavoidable. Sarah had insisted on preparing the meal herself, arranging the family in a circle that seemed more strategic than casual. Ella and Max sat opposite their parents, fidgeting, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in their eyes. Daniel, quiet and tense, avoided direct eye contact, his hands wrapped around his fork like a talisman against the truth he had delayed revealing. Liam was there, seated quietly at the far end, a small figure with wide, observant eyes, his presence both alien and intimate. He had been introduced subtly earlier in the day, a cautious meeting that had felt more like reconnaissance than connection. But tonight, the proximity of shared space magnified every emotion. Sarah took a slow breath and began. "We need to talk, all of us." The words, simple yet deliberate, silenced the room. Liam's eyes flickered between the adults, sensing the gravity without fully comprehending the nuances. Daniel spoke first, his voice low and deliberate. "Liam, you know we've kept things from you, and from Ella and Max. It wasn't because we wanted to hurt anyone. We were trying to manage the situation carefully." Ella's hands tightened around her napkin. "Manage it? You mean lie about it?" Her voice cracked, a sharp edge of betrayal cutting through the polite formality of the dinner setting. Max, quieter but no less intense, added, "Yeah. We noticed things. And now we know. You could have told us earlier." Liam shifted in his seat, uncomfortable under the sudden emotional intensity. I know about her," he said, voice small but clear, referring to Sarah. "I know she's your mom." The revelation hung in the air, heavier than any physical object could be. Daniel and Sarah exchanged a glance, realizing the complexity of the emotions swirling between the children, the jealousy, confusion, fear, and tentative acknowledgement. Sarah's voice softened, though it carried authority. "Liam, we're all figuring this out. There's no easy way to explain things, but honesty is the only way forward." Ella, furious and vulnerable, leaned forward. "Do you even understand how this makes us feel? That you had a child and didn't tell us? That we're supposed to just accept this?" Liam's small hands clenched into fists. "I didn't ask to be here," he whispered, eyes welling. "I didn't ask for any of this." The tension was nearly unbearable. Daniel's voice trembled slightly as he tried to reconcile the conflicting emotions in the room. "None of us asked for this," he said. "But it's our reality now. And we have to figure it out together." Sarah placed a hand over Liam's, offering what comfort she could, a gesture of acceptance in the midst of chaos. "We're going to make mistakes," she said, "but we will try. We have to try, for all of us." The room fell silent, save for the occasional scrape of silverware or the faint hum of the refrigerator. Each family member was lost in their own internal dialogue, processing the weight of revelations and the intricate web of emotions. Ella's eyes, bright with unshed tears, softened slightly. I don't know if I can understand it all yet," she admitted. "But I want to try." Max nodded in agreement, more quietly, his gaze flicking toward Liam with a tentative acknowledgement. Liam, in turn, offered a small, awkward smile, bridging the gap between fear and the fragile possibility of connection. Daniel exhaled, a long, weary breath, and leaned back. "This won't be easy," he said. "There will be arguments, misunderstandings, but we're together now, in this moment. And that counts for something." Sarah reached across the table, touching her husband's hand briefly. The gesture was small, but significant, a silent pact of endurance, honesty, and willingness to navigate the emotional terrain before them. As dinner continued, conversation became more measured, cautious but genuine. Laughter, tentative at first, began to punctuate the dialogue. The family's previous rhythm, fractured by secrets, started to find its cadence again, imperfect, awkward, but real. By the end of the evening, the Mitchells had not solved everything. Liam's presence, a living testament to past choices, had introduced complexity that could not be erased. But they had confronted the truth, together, and in that confrontation lay the first steps toward understanding, reconciliation, and the tentative formation of a new family dynamic. The night ended not in resolution, but in acknowledgement. They were bound by love, complicated and flawed as it was, and by the shared willingness to face their lives with honesty, courage, and the hope that, in time, the fractures could be healed. The days that followed the dinner confrontation were quieter, yet more emotionally turbulent than any words could capture. The Mitchell household moved cautiously, each member negotiating a new normal in which Liam was no longer an abstract concept but a physical presence with needs, desires, and perceptions that could not be ignored. Sarah found herself hyper-aware of the subtle shifts in body language, the silent exchanges of glances between the children, and the tentative questions Liam posed about his place in this family. Even simple interactions, pouring juice, handing out plates, answering routine questions, felt charged with significance, each action a test of acceptance, patience, and emotional dexterity. Daniel, usually confident and measured, wrestled privately with guilt and the relentless weight of responsibility. He observed his children's reactions, aware that their loyalty and trust were delicately balanced on the edge of revelation and reconciliation. Every moment of laughter shared with Liam brought a pang of both relief and sorrow, a reminder of what had been hidden and what had to be rebuilt. Ella, more outspoken, grappled with an inner storm. Her initial fury had softened into cautious curiosity, yet resentment lingered beneath the surface. She watched Liam carefully, noting his reactions, trying to anticipate his feelings, and at times, struggling with a complex mix of empathy and jealousy. Her diary, once a private sanctuary, now carried entries filled with raw emotions, attempts at understanding, and the tentative outlines of a plan to bridge the emotional gap between them. Max, quieter and introspective, observed rather than acted. He noted the subtle ways Liam moved through the house, the expressions that flickered across his young face, and the ways his father and mother adjusted their routines to accommodate him. Max's own internal conflict was a delicate weave of concern, curiosity, and a growing sense of responsibility to mediate the tensions that sometimes flared unpredictably. Liam, for his part, was perceptive beyond his years. He had internalized the complex dynamics of this new environment, the unspoken rules, the tentative gestures of trust, and the subtle boundaries established by Sarah and Daniel. He had his own moments of rebellion and withdrawal, but also glimpses of warmth and connection that hinted at the possibility of genuine attachment. One evening, as the family gathered for a casual board game, tensions subtly surfaced. Ella's competitive streak clashed with Liam's quiet determination, and Max's patience was tested as small misunderstandings escalated into brief arguments. Daniel intervened gently, reminding them that connection required patience and understanding. Sarah offered quiet guidance, emphasizing the importance of empathy and listening. By the end of the night, the game concluded not with victory or defeat but with a shared laughter that felt fragile yet authentic. It was a small victory, symbolic of the painstaking work required to integrate Liam fully into the family's emotional ecosystem. The parents recognized that every day would be a negotiation, a balance between acknowledgement of past secrets and the creation of new patterns of interaction. They understood that reconciliation required more than words. It required consistent attention to the needs of every family member, a willingness to confront discomfort, and a recognition that love was complex, layered, and sometimes contradictory. In the quiet moments before bed, Sarah reflected on the fragile bonds that had begun to form. She realized that acceptance was not instantaneous, that understanding was a gradual process, and that the family's future depended not on erasing the past but on navigating it together with honesty, compassion, and resilience. Daniel, lying awake beside her, felt a similar sense of cautious optimism. He knew that challenges lay ahead, arguments, misunderstandings, and the occasional flare of resentment, but he also recognized the profound opportunity embedded within this crisis, the chance to rebuild, reconnect, and cultivate a family stronger for having faced its own complicated truths. Outside, the night was calm, the streetlights casting long shadows across the quiet suburban lawns. Inside, the Mitchell household hummed softly with the rhythms of tentative reconciliation, a family learning to coexist, adapt, and nurture trust in a reality complicated by hidden lives and the unexpected presence of a child from the past. The first light of morning spilled softly through the Mitchell household, touching the edges of familiar furniture with a glow that made the ordinary seem fragile yet precious. The past weeks had been turbulent, filled with revelations and confrontations, and yet here they were. 4 children, 2 parents, and a boy who had only recently been folded into their lives. Breakfast was quieter than usual, but it carried a different weight, less tense, more intentional. Sarah moved methodically, placing plates and pouring juice, noticing the small gestures that had become symbols of cautious trust. Liam sat at the far end of the table, fiddling with his fork but occasionally glancing at Ella and Max, absorbing the rhythms of this family he was learning to inhabit. Ella, still perceptive and brimming with cautious curiosity, watched her father as he carried himself differently now, more deliberate, more present. "Dad," she said, finally breaking the silence, "I think I'm ready to try. I want to understand Liam, not just because he's part of you, but because he's part of our lives too." Max nodded in agreement, quieter but equally earnest. Liam's small smile in response was tentative, a mixture of relief and uncertainty, signaling his own willingness to participate in this fragile reconciliation. Daniel felt a surge of emotion he couldn't quite name. Pride, relief, guilt, threads tangled together, forming a complex knot in his chest. "We'll take it slowly," he said, voice low but steady. "We won't get it right every day. There will be misunderstandings, frustrations, and mistakes. But we'll try, all of us, together." The day unfolded with small, meaningful moments. Liam and Max worked on a simple puzzle, their hands brushing as they reached for pieces, a minor clash followed by shared laughter. Ella and Liam sat on the couch, sketching quietly, exchanging observations about school and friends. Daniel observed these interactions, feeling the subtle shifts, the beginnings of bonds forming in spaces previously filled with suspicion and tension. Sarah, meanwhile, began to notice her own emotional transformation. The resentment she had harbored toward Daniel for hiding Liam softened into a more complex understanding of human imperfection and the ways adults navigate past mistakes. The boy's presence, though disruptive, revealed the depth of their capacity for compassion, patience, and love. Over the following week, routines began to stabilize. Meals were shared with fewer awkward pauses, chores were distributed with tentative cooperation, and the occasional playful argument reminded them that they were alive, together, and imperfectly human. Liam contributed to family life, not as an intruder but as a participant, learning, laughing, testing boundaries, and discovering the contours of this new family. One evening, after a long day of school and work, the family gathered in the living room. Daniel suggested a board game, an attempt at connection that had once seemed trivial but now carried symbolic weight. Laughter filled the room, tentative at first, then more genuine, echoing across the walls that had borne silent tension for so long. Later, as Sarah and Daniel sat together in the quiet of the night, they reflected on the fragile victories of the day. "It's not perfect," Sarah said softly, tracing the rim of her mug with a finger. "But it feels like we're moving in the right direction. Slowly, but moving." Daniel nodded. "Yes, we've faced the truth, all of it. And the children, they're resilient. They'll adapt, just as we have. And Liam, he's part of our lives now, for better or worse. We can choose to let him in, or push him out." "I want to let him in." Sarah reached for his hand, intertwining fingers. It was a simple gesture, yet one charged with years of love, mistakes, hope, and shared endurance. In that moment, the weight of the past seemed slightly lighter, the future slightly more navigable. As night deepened, the house settled into its rhythms. The quiet breathing of children in their rooms, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the floorboards. Life, messy and complicated, continued. Yet within the complexity, there was hope. Acceptance, they realized, was not a single event but a process, a deliberate choice made every day, in gestures both small and profound. By the end of the week, Liam had learned to navigate the household with greater ease, finding his place among siblings who were once wary but now cautiously welcoming. Ella's curiosity shifted into empathy, Max's quiet observation transformed into protective care, and Daniel and Sarah discovered a renewed capacity to balance honesty, patience, and love. The Mitchell family, though irrevocably changed, began to live with a sense of equilibrium. They were not perfect, nor were their bonds untested, but they were present, attentive, and willing to confront the complexity of their shared lives. The fractures of secrecy had been addressed, and in the careful repair of relationships, a new, imperfectly beautiful rhythm had emerged. In the quiet of night, Sarah reflected on the journey they had undertaken. The pain of hidden truths, the turbulence of revelation, and the slow, deliberate work of healing. It would take time, months, perhaps years, to fully integrate Liam into the emotional fabric of the household. But for now, they had reached a point where acceptance was not just an idea, but a lived experience. And in that fragile, luminous moment, the Mitchell family discovered that love could endure even in the aftermath of betrayal, that trust could be rebuilt with patience, and that a family, however complicated and flawed, could survive, adapt, and grow stronger through honesty and commitment. The house, once shadowed by secrecy and tension, now resonated with quiet laughter, tentative warmth, and the subtle, enduring presence of connection, a testament to the resilience of family and the possibility of reconciliation in the modern world.